Good evening. Welcome to the Nantucket Historical Association. My name is Jocelyn Wong, and I am the Director of Community Engagement here at the NHA. Today, we will view a roughly 12-minute documentary, Coskata-Coatue, a refuge on the edge. The Coskata-Coatue Wildlife Refuge provides the barrier beach protection that forms Nantucket Harbor. It is a habitat for rare and endangered species, a suitable spot for fishing and bird watching, and a truly wild place. In this documentary, the Nantucket Conservation Foundation and the trustees explore the changing landscape of the refuge, which is already experiencing climate change impacts. So after we view this film, we'll move into a Q&A discussion with representatives from NCF, including Dr. Jennifer Karberg, Director of Research and Partnerships, and Neil Foley, Interpretive Education Coordinator and Ecologist, as well as a couple representatives from the trustees that we are so privileged to have on island for this program. Shay Fee, coastal ecologist, and Diane Lang, the refuge manager. So without further ado, I will welcome up to the podium Neil Foley, who will introduce the film.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Thank you to the NHA for hosting this. This is a really fun endeavor that we got into in 2022. Started planning out this documentary, and it was produced locally with a lot of help from Yellow Productions. Chris and Laura did fantastic work following myself and Shay around looking at birds and capturing some really incredible, captivating images of this refuge. It's a really beautiful place, and we took a lot of time and thought and effort into telling the story in an effective way. So thank you for the people who you will soon see talking about their experiences on the refuge. And without further ado, please enjoy.
Just purely based on the science, sea level is rising, and it's rising at an accelerated rate.
But New England is actually seeing more accelerated rates than anywhere else in the world.
By 2050, on the island of Nantucket at a high tide, we're expecting to see over 25 miles of road inundated and over 600 buildings inundated. The Haulover and Coskata Pond in particular are projected to be underwater at a high tide by the year 2070. Those numbers don't take into account a potential breach on the Coskata-Coatue Wildlife Refuge.
The Coskata-Coatue Wildlife Refuge is what defines the harbor of Nantucket.
The refuge buffers the town from intense storms, from intense wave energy, and then the resulting erosion that would happen because of that. We expect the beaches and our natural areas to change, but when we've built a town behind a barrier beach system, a potential breach could cause devastating consequences to the town.
We might lose the ecology of what's in the harbor, where our shellfish are growing, where people are fishing, where people have their homes and docks and boats.
The refuge has lost between 60 and 70 acres over the past 100 years. The access is definitely concerning because the areas that you use to access the refuge are those areas that are going to be impacted with sea level rise.
It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when we have a major storm that comes close enough during a high tide, we could have major loss of this refuge.
Water is coming whether we want it to or not.
We're dealing with Mother Nature.
We can't look at our children in the eye and say, we did nothing, we didn't even try. I think all the efforts that we make, even if it feels temporary, is worth having these visitors, having these unique experiences in the moment.
Nantucket is an island, a spit of sand, 30 miles out to sea. We were pushed here by a glacier about 25,000 years ago, and for some reason, we're still above the ocean waves today. If you've only been in the few blocks downtown, you're not seeing the full island. You need to get out into some of these wild places and see how truly beautiful the gift of conservation land is on Nantucket. People come from all over the world to visit Nantucket. And when you make the extra trip to go out to Great Point, to come out to Coatue, air down your tires, it's an adventure. And on this island is one of the best you can experience.
One of my most favorite experiences on the refuge is honestly just driving up the haulover, and then you get on this sand beach and there's rolling dunes on either side with the beach grass waving. And you know that the Atlantic Ocean is just over that dune and you can't quite see it. There's nothing between us and Portugal. It's just this wild, spectacular place, and I kind of get some of that awe almost every time I drive up and over.
I think that the cuspate spits that are found in the harbor are spectacular. They're world famous. Coastal scientists around the world actually study these cuspate spits.
It's very special and it's unique. It's just so beautiful. It's my favorite place in the world. The unique geology and ecology of the refuge really provides incredible habitat for a number of rare and important species. A few different focal species, one being the piping plover, another being the American oystercatcher, and then we protect several different species of tern. The refuge also provides habitat for migratory shorebirds who don't breed here, but during the spring and late summer, we start seeing migrants heading off of their breeding areas, and they utilize the refuge to rest and refuel.
The refuge is a really beautiful place to fish really all year round. You can go places and really not see another soul. The environment is so beautiful and it's just full of, besides fish, all other sorts of interesting things to watch. Fishermen are allowed to access the refuge 24/7. They allow fishermen access even at night. As long as you're fishing, you can come out here. Such a great thing.
I've been studying these beaches for 30 years. I see dramatic changes. So by 2070 in the refuge, we have areas that are going to be getting wet at every high tide cycle. Areas that now are occupied by beach and dune. I mean, that could be 3 or 4 feet of sea level rise between now and 2070. If you translate that into the harbor area, can you imagine what 3 or 4 feet of sea level rise is going to do to the harbor over time? It'll be pretty dramatic.
A lot of our big impact storms are these nor'easter storms coming straight at town. That's the direction of the wind and wave impacts. But because Coatue is there as a buffer that slows down those storm impacts, they're not directly hitting town.
So if there was no harbor, your downtown area would be your beach.
We contracted with a consultant called Woods Hole Group, and we identified 2 high priority sites that we really wanted to focus in on. The first is the Coskata Pond site, and the second is a place called the Haulover. So those 2 sites, if the beach were to breach, we would see water exchange between the open ocean and Nantucket Harbor. And we don't really know what impact that might have on the town. Based on what's happened in other places, we know that that could mean changes to the level of water in the harbor, increased flooding, threatening our infrastructure for the town and the port, and also increased erosion as waves and that higher energy water from the ocean is able to move through the harbor. Recently, we have seen with higher tides that we've had to close portions of the beach to vehicle access. We didn't ever used to have to close it unless there was a big storm, but now we're closing it more frequently because of high tides.
I have had to close this refuge more for flooding than I have had to close for birds on the beach. We have had days and weeks of this refuge being underwater and completely shut down. Having vehicle access on this refuge is a privilege. We live in the moment, we take advantage, and we enjoy every moment that we have. This is not forever.
I think that the refuge itself will be okay, but the access is definitely concerning. So any of the trails that are on the landward side, you raise sea level even a foot, and a lot of those trails are not going to be usable anymore.
We can wait until these impacts occur, but oftentimes that is too late to do something to increase the resilience. So we need to be thinking about it right now.
Some of the work that we're doing in response to climate change is studying the impacts to natural areas across the island, but also specifically out on the refuge. We're studying how erosion is happening across the refuge and thinking about ways we can use nature to protect itself and protect the rest of the island. Protecting our salt marshes, building up our dune systems will actually help buy us time while we start to think of these more innovative solutions to help protect the island. One of the innovative resilient solutions that we're thinking about putting in out on the refuge is actually utilizing intertidal oyster reefs that actually help slow down the impact of even everyday regular waves that are coming in and hitting a shoreline. It can be used in front of a salt marsh. It can be used in front of a smaller dune area or a sandier dune area, and to protect it from erosion, but also even maybe to actively create salt marshes across the refuge that will provide that protection piece as well. And then oysters are amazing at improving water quality, which is just an added benefit. You get a reef protection and you get an ecological water quality benefit as well.
Great Point and Coatue for many people is their go-to spot on Nantucket. If they couldn't access it, it would really affect their enjoyment of Nantucket and life, basically.
I live on Nantucket year-round and raise my young children out here. Coming out to the refuge is probably one of our most favorite things to do on the weekend. So I would love to have those experiences be accessible for future generations.
When I think about the future, the next 5, 10, 15 years, it really matters for the next 30, 40, the moves that we make in this immediate time. We have an opportunity and we don't want it wasted. And that's what it's all about, protecting it for the next generation and keeping this place for years to come.
All right, well, thank you all so much for coming out this evening. We thought, we have a couple of us up here, we'd do a quick go through of introductions, just in case you don't know everyone. And then we were each gonna take just a few minutes to talk about next steps that we see after this video, because that's kind of what we're left is, you know, we've showed you how spectacular the refuge is. And we've showed you some of the impacts that are coming. So what are we gonna do next, or what are we thinking about, or what are we seeing, what are we observing? And then after we each do that, we're going to open it up for questions, and we're going to be pretty casual and open about that. So anything you guys want to ask us about what you've seen or thoughts you've experienced while you've been out on the refuge. So introductions first. I'm Dr. Jen Karberg. I'm the Director of Research and Partnerships for the Nantucket Conservation Foundation. I'm also a wetland ecologist. I spend a lot of my time in salt marshes, which means out on Nantucket. In recent years, I spent a lot of my time thinking about climate change and coastal resilience. So that's kind of been my pathway in recent years, and that's what my focus is out on the refuge, is understanding how we can make spaces like that and other places on Nantucket more resilient in the future by using nature. Diane.
Thank you. I'm Diane Lang, and I'm the Coskata-Coatue Wildlife Refuge manager, and I've spent the last 15 years managing not just here, but I manage properties for the trustees on the mainland, specifically for public use and enjoyment. And what I'm trying to do here is just manage what I have and what we have available in order to access the refuge. This winter was particularly devastating with many, many storms, and I'm happy to take questions about anything related to managing the refuge.
I'm Neil Foley. I'm the Interpretive Education Coordinator and Ecologist for the Nantucket Conservation Foundation. Help to put things like this together, get people to actually appreciate the value of conservation land on Nantucket. I also, in a previous hat, in a previous life, I guess it feels like, I was the Coatue Ranger for 6 summers, so I know intimately what this property has in store and what we risk failing to appreciate out there.
Hi everyone, I am Shay Fee, coastal ecologist for the trustees. I am from Nantucket and work seasonally for the trustees as their shorebird technician since, I guess that was 2017. Now I am based on Martha's Vineyard. Please hold your booze. But I manage our shorebird protection program both on Martha's Vineyard and our refuge here on Nantucket. So it's, like I said, one of my favorite places in the world, and I do hold it near and dear to my heart, but my work focuses on protecting the ecology of the system as a whole, and looking out for our both listed and non-listed species to make sure we're giving them the space to be successful, all while trying to get you all out there to enjoy the property.
So we put this, well, we started thinking about this film, what did we decide, Neil, 2022?
2022.
2022. I was thinking it was, I was thinking it was last summer, and it wasn't. We spent a lot of time figuring out, knowing that we had this place that we all spend a lot of time on, put a lot of resources in. A lot of people also come and spend a lot of time out here, but knowing the issues that are coming and seeing some of the erosion and the washover and the changes in the beaches out there, and knowing that we needed to spend some time focusing on the refuge to understand what's happening out there and what's going to happen in the next couple years. And that's in the video. It mentions that we had hired a consultant to actually do some really detailed and complicated modeling and assessment of what impacts will look like in the future, what erosion and storms will look like out there. And from that, we had a lot of information. But we were also trying to figure out, how do we tell this story in a way that we can relate it to everyone? And I'll admit it took me quite a while to read the modeling and understand what all those numbers were, and I'm not sure I could say I completely understand how it was all done. There's a lot of math involved. But this documentary was what we came up with. We thought, how do we pull together a bunch of different people that work on the refuge, use the refuge, tell the story about why it's important, and then start to talk about some of the impacts that we're seeing out there and what we can expect in the future. And we saw this documentary as a bit of a rallying to arms and appreciate how important the refuge is, get people invested in wanting to help us and follow us along as we're doing work to protect the refuge. And what's up behind us now actually is a website that we put together, and it's Coskata-Coatue.org. You can go to that website. We're trying to update that with new information that both of the organizations, the trustees and the Nantucket Conservation Foundation, are working on as our next steps following this documentary.
It is hosted by the trustees. Their graphic design team did a fantastic job putting this all together. The other resources on here that you should definitely check out, there's a 360-degree tour that we did, a virtual tour of the entire refuge where you can hear representatives from both organizations talk about the projects that we do, some of those key points, and really incredible resource that we did before the documentary. And then obviously links to watch this again if you want to share it with anybody going forward, and ways to keep up with the current work that's happening on the refuge.
Yeah. And I was going to give kind of just a little update on where we are on the research and science side of things, and then I'm hoping that Diane and Shay can talk a little bit about some of those observations from this winter that you saw out there and kind of current status since we did this documentary, which is now 2 years ago, which in the pace of sea level rise and erosion actually can be outdated by now. So after we did this work, we did this video, we identified those 2 places based on all of that complicated modeling work that our consultants helped us do, that we knew were the most at risk for erosion from big storms, for that kind of breakthrough and water exchange between the harbor and the Atlantic Ocean. That's really kind of one of the big focuses that will change access on the refuge significantly and change the ecology of the refuge and the ecology of the harbor. And so we picked the 2 places that were mentioned in the documentary, and that's the haulover. So as you're driving up the road from Wauwinet, and right before you take that turn and drive out onto the outside beach, there's the beach and dune system and the road that you drive on, and then there's a salt marsh before you get to the harbor. That area there is one of our primary areas that's most at risk for actually water washing over from the Atlantic in larger storms, but that salt marsh is starting to get flooded out and really wants to migrate into where the road is and where the dune is. So there's a lot of water that's coming in from the harbor and high tides as well. So we identified that space, and then we identified the beach that's right at the edge of Coskata Pond, the beach dune system, right at the end of the pond, and on the other side of the beach dune is the Atlantic Ocean. And that's an area that if that breaks open, it's pretty narrow there. And if that breaks open, it's not just ecology, but it's access that is getting impacted. So that's really why the trustees and the foundation focused in on those 2 sites. And what we're doing right now, we have some students and professors from Boston University that are collecting a lot of data out there to help us model potential breaching. They actually use some ground penetrating radar to see where breaches, where openings had happened before. So they're working on that data, and they're working on some modeling of how sediment is moving around that part of the harbor, how sand is moving, how erosion is happening, where it might get deposited. A couple of those modeling situations that there's a grad student that's working on. So we're getting some more data, but we also just got a fairly large grant. We call it the NIFWIF grant. It's the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant that we got this year. That's a really competitive grant focused on coastal resilience. And with it, we're in the process of, again, hiring some consultants that will look at those 2 sites and actually help us design some of those innovative ways that we can intervene and increase resilience there. And I'll say one of the things I've learned, if you don't know this, the foundation is just in the process of doing a really big restoration out at our windswept bog property. We can't just decide that we want to do restoration. We can't just decide that we want to do an intervention like building up dunes and trapping more sand and making it more resilient. We have to have design plans to go through the permitting process to then hire someone to help us do the work. And so we're having to take all these steps. And so getting grants like these helps nonprofits and organizations like the Trustees actually be able to do all those steps. So right now we're trying to really get to the point where we have a plan on paper that we can take to the Concom and the Army Corps and the Department of Environmental Protection in Massachusetts, all those different places, so that then we can get the permission to do some of those interventions. And I will say we're looking at a lot of, or we're asking for a lot of, again, how do we use nature to protect the beach? How do we build up elevation naturally? And we don't want to truck a bunch of sand out to the refuge that gets washed away in a storm. That's not really something we're interested in, because sand is such a valuable commodity on this island. So we're really charging the consultants that we hire, the researchers that we hire, to maybe think outside the box a little bit and help us come up with some ideas that will make us more resilient without destroying the ecology and the beauty of the refuge. So that's where I'm seeing next steps at the foundation. Diane, do you want to talk a little bit about what this winter looked like out there and what you've been seeing out on the refuge with change?
Just tell me when to stop.
Okay.
So this winter, I consider maybe starting about January 6th, we started with a flooding storm. And since January 6th, we have essentially been closed for one of three reasons. We're either flooding the East Beach right up to the edge of the dune system, which is not where you want to ever drive. We also experienced multiple areas from the harbor side during extreme west winds and high tides that came through the dune system, flooded the Haulover Trail and the entire Village Road Trail. Again, we don't want people driving through salt water, and that necessitated closures. We had areas where there was about 2 feet of water, and that was salt water. I shouldn't taste it, but I do. And
That's how you know.
yeah, right. So it was actually yesterday that we made the decision that we could open, and today, 3 hours before, not an extreme high tide, we had to shut it down. 3 weeks ago, just under 3 weeks ago, the beginning of April, we had a severe easterly wind. I don't know what the highest winds were, but they were over 40 miles an hour. Hit the East Beach, and before that happened, I thought, we got about 6 good years we could be driving out there. And then after I came back looking at what happened to the beach, I thought, we got about 6 months we could be driving out there. But we're in a good situation because spring we usually see accretion. So we're hoping for that accretion to happen. The Galls, which is the narrow strip of land, you may know where it is. It's Atlantic Ocean on one side, Nantucket Sound on the other, just before you get up to Great Point proper. That washed over during that storm and has continued to wash over every high tide until last weekend was the first time it stopped washing over. Today it washed over again during the high tide. So it's dramatic. I have taken multiple videos because I find it hard to articulate. So I feel that at some point we'll be able to look at these videos, associate them with locations. Since I started in 2018, I have played Mother Nature, whiting out trails on maps that just don't exist anymore. Unfortunately, this is probably the first public announcement, but I mentioned earlier that the Coskata Woods Trail is now permanently flooded. We do not have access to the harbor, which is just a magical beach area in front of Coskata Woods. And these are the harborside areas that many people don't often think of when we think of the inundation and the ocean flooding us. So we are all looking forward to seeing some plans and give us some hope. And yeah, and just like I said in the documentary, we need to go when we can go. Don't put it off. And if anybody needs a ride out there, you can let me know and I'll give you a ride out there. I know for years I didn't have a four-wheel drive vehicle. So everyone should take a look while we can, because who knows what's going to happen.
Well, I think in the documentary, there's two lines that really stick with me the more I watch this. I mean, I've watched this dozens of times, but it's when Tara says that the refuge is going to be fine, but the access is concerning. I mean, this is how islands and micro islands and those habitats are created. You know, that is an accreted barrier beach. It took thousands of years for it to get laid there by the tides and the winds. And, you know, it will see some fluctuation of that water level, but our ability to access it is going to be at risk. And the next most impactful line is what you said, that vehicle access is a privilege, and we need to really treat it as such. You know, there could be a time in 6 months, or you know, in a short amount of time, when there's only pedestrian access out to Coatue, and that's a real possibility. And you know, my heart goes out to everybody who loves and incorporates that driving access out to Great Point in their vacation time, or in their, you know, every week. You know, I get people telling me all the time my favorite thing is to go to Great Point. But I also recognize, you know, there's only so much we can do with an increasingly thin part of this island. And we're in a really dynamic system. You know, sand moves how it wants to sometimes, and the wind and the waves move it constantly. And Coatue has been separated from the rest of Nantucket before. There was about a quarter-mile wide channel in between the harbor and the East Beach in the early 1900s. And it lasted for 12 years before it finally closed itself. So it hasn't been the first time that Coatue would have been separated. Unfortunately, it's just something that, as we keep dealing with these stronger storms, more frequency of these storms, it's just a problem that we're gonna have to deal with more and more and more. And you know, as a refuge manager, you probably see it more than anybody else. And yeah, that's really hard to be on the front lines of that, for sure.
I will say that, and Shay, I do want you to talk, but I just wanted to follow up real quick on Neil. I'll say that one of our challenges to the consultants that we're looking to hire in the next week is that we want to increase resiliency on the refuge, and we want to figure out, can we do it while maintaining access? Because access is really key, and even as it is right now, like you said, not everyone has a four-wheel drive vehicle. So there's already a limitation to the people that can get out there. But if you take away access, or if nature takes away access by four-wheel drive vehicles, then it comes down to those who are privileged enough to have access to a boat of some kind to get out there. And so that really does start to limit and make access to the refuge even more privileged. And we'd like to see what can we do that helps maintain access longer term while maintaining resiliency? Is it possible? So that really is kind of our charge to the groups that we're going to hire to help us with this problem. Now, Shay, you've spent a lot of time out there.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, I don't know how, it's been 8 years or going on 9 years, I guess, working out there. And in terms of habitat changes for wildlife, I have seen some pretty dramatic changes, but in the past 2 years, actually, shorebird habitat has remained fairly stable. We see the birds nesting in similar areas. There hasn't been a lot of new habitat creation, and I think the stability we're seeing there is a real testament to how we've managed for a long time now, with resiliency in mind. So that's a good thing. Overall, shorebird habitat, there is a concern with rising sea levels and climate change. What experts are saying initially will probably happen is there'll be sort of a boom in habitat creation. So you'll see with more storms, higher tides,
things like dunes getting washed over or blowouts forming along the beach, and that is superb shorebird habitat. They love that sort of stuff. But in the long run, the concern is you're going to be seeing more overwash later into the season. So what does that mean for our birds? Well, our birds will nest in these low-lying areas, and then the high tide will come in and wash out their eggs, and you're not going to be seeing chicks hatch. Productivity is going to plummet, most likely. So that's the overall concern. Providing them with a spot that's just far enough above the new sea level so they're able to hatch their chicks is something we're concerned about. But for now, things are pretty stable. Our productivity numbers are pretty stable, but it's something we're keeping an eye on. I mean, like Diane said, there's certain trails out there that don't even exist anymore. I'm thinking of these interdune trails we used to have sort of just north of the Galls, and they were there for seemingly forever. And then all of a sudden, one winter, in 2017, they're just gone. The whole dune was gone. So these changes can happen so rapidly. I think, you know, all of us who live on the coast or live on an island are familiar with that. But I'm glad we are trying to do something, not only to maintain access, but to help the beach be as resilient as it can be, to help protect the harbor, town, etc. So happy to be a part of that action.
And Shay, the refuge, as far as being important for shorebirds in the state of Massachusetts and in New England, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's one of the most important refuges that we have for shorebird nesting populations, correct? We have some of the better, larger populations on our refuge.
Yeah, absolutely. We, especially American oyster catchers, which are great charismatic species.
It is the densest breeding colony of American oyster catchers in their entire range.
Yeah. So, I mean, the islands, Nantucket itself holds about 25% of the entire state breeding population of this species. The other 25% is on Martha's Vineyard, so the islands really support this species in the state, and we play a big role in their conservation. They're not currently a listed species, but they are on the State Wildlife Action Plan. They're an at-risk species. They're rare on the landscape in Massachusetts as a whole, but we see them all the time, so we're really lucky. Some years we have large tern colonies that nest out there. Sometimes they're the biggest in the state. That hasn't happened in a few years, but it has happened, and there's plenty of habitat out there, and seemingly plenty of food for them. So it's just a wait and see for the terns. They're a little flighty. But yeah, and it provides one of the state's largest nesting gull colonies. So we have the great blackback and the herring gull that nest on Coatue, and then we have another colony up at the tip of Great Point, and there's hundreds of birds. We're going to be surveying those colonies this year, actually. We do it about every 5 years, and I kind of forget the numbers, but it was close to 600 birds up near Great Point nesting and several hundred on Coatue as well.
Yeah, something like that. And then, I mean, add in other colonial water birds. I mean, we have egrets, black-crowned night herons. Egrets of 2 different species. And then, yeah, the gulls, you know, we've had our 2 flavors for a long time, but we're always looking out for laughing gulls and their return to breeding on Nantucket and Tuckernuck and maybe Muskeget if we can get over there. But yeah, it'll be really interesting to see what the waterbird census this year yields.
Yeah, but overall, the wildlife seems to be doing well out there. You know, if you go out there in the winter, the seals are still breeding out there. They're still pupping out there. You know, you can, on good days, see 1,000 seals hauled out on the beach. So we're still providing that habitat. But like we keep saying, it's really the oversand vehicle access is really the thing that's most at risk right now.
Now, we've thrown a lot of information at you guys between the video and all of the stuff we were just talking about, and we want to make sure people get a chance to ask any questions. We have a whole, a lot of resource of people up here to answer questions about the refuge. Some people that have lived on the refuge, some people that have worked out there for years. Do you guys have any questions for us?
Have you all studied the area called the hullover for any remains of when it was used as a hullover?
Good question, Mark. So the ground penetrating radar that the students at Boston University did, so basically it's this big box that bounces radar signals down into the ground, and wherever they bounce back, you get this picture of what different densities of soil, changes in soil. We actually used it out there, another researcher used it out there to look at the cedars and how the cedars kind of lie across Coatue. But you get an image, you can get an image of what's under the ground. And they did that in the Hullover region, and we haven't seen the maps yet, but that's what we should get from the work that they did, is actually a picture of where those openings had been in the past. One of the interesting things that I think, and I think it maybe sets us up to be a little more resilient if we can leverage it, is that when the Hullover, the Hullover was kind of, in some ways, cut purposefully a very long time ago. It's called the Hullover because that's where people would take their boats at the end of the harbor and actually get them out to the ocean, as opposed to taking the long trip around Great Point. So it used to just kind of haul your boat up and over what was a fairly thin barrier beach. Sometimes it opened, often it closed. There's a lot of sand that moves up that east beach, so it closes pretty quickly. But the big salt marsh that we have there now that's on the harbor side, that's grown and accumulated since the Hullover really opened as significantly as it used to. So one of the things that at least I'm hoping for is that if we can make that salt marsh a little more resilient, that will help when we're getting some washover events on the dune itself. Diane, do you have any other, or Neil, information about the Hullover? Yeah.
I don't know when the last time it was actually used to haul dories over into the East Beach. Who knows?
Right.
But yeah, that'd be some really interesting history to look into.
Yeah, maybe the NHA has some more information on that.
I think so.
Plug.
Yeah, great question. Do we have any others? Spruce?
Mr.
I think
Spruce.
Jocelyn's got a mic for you.
Great talk, great documentary. I have a question. I think it's for Jen. Have you used photogrammetry at all to try and do some mapping out there as one of your tools to do some figuring out what's going on and what the future looks like?
That's a good question. We haven't. So you can use drones. You can do actual mapping and really detailed 3D mapping with photogrammy. And we have. I don't think we have. Have you guys?
Not yet.
Nope, not yet. It would be a really good.
It's on my work plan.
It's on Diane's work plan. She wants to do it.
Oh,
It would give
good.
us some good images of, we've got like transects, lines that we've done really detailed elevation on over time that you can make graphs of, but we don't have the 3D imaging.
Yeah, that'd be great for a baseline. And I can send you an email of a guy that's been doing some work on Baxter Road.
I know who, is he on island?
Jacob, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I have a comment, and I think one of the most important things you guys have stressed is access. And as a member of the public, I'd like to know if I'm driving out, if there's access. And I know it can't be instantaneous. I know the phone can't be updated. It can't be someone always updating. But I was thinking about it today, and I don't know if this will ever patch HDC, but a little sign maybe inside the window at the gatehouse that says, a property, and that could be remote controlled, like Neil could operate it from when he's in England or wherever, So you could, you know what I mean? You could, it wouldn't have to be anyone being at the gatehouse. You could just say, the refuge is open, the refuge is closed, or just a thought. And I'm not asking for any feedback on that, but I just want to throw that out there. So I just thought it would be, because people don't want to drive all the way out the village road and then see the gate closed over there.
So that would require people reading signs.
True.
This year we're introducing a text alert system.
Oh, I think that's a great idea.
It's on our website, and we'll be distributing it. So as soon as we know, we will text it out, and then that will enable people to not have to wait like today we had to go put the closed signs up, and then we go back, and then we change our voicemail system, which people are using frequently, to see if we're open or closed. And sometimes there is an hour delay with that phone messaging system. And our neighbors don't like big signs, so we try to keep the refuge closed sign pretty small. So yes, I think the text messaging for people who have cell phones will be beneficial, and we do try to put the refuge closed sign at the gatehouse up as soon as we know we're shutting down. So
And we're
thanks for
working
that.
on social media as well, right? Getting that up and running for the island.
Thank you, Shay. I always forget about social media because I avoid it. So yes, the trustees are going to offer, we're going to come up with a Nantucket page, and we're going to frequently update with more timely photos, and then all of the information that people want to know about access. So coming soon to a computer near you.
Would one of you please repeat the term that was used for those, what I've been told were fingers? What's that interesting phrase I heard for the first time today?
They're cuspate spits. Cuspate spits.
Cuspate. Really interesting formation. The currents in the harbor come in through that channel next to town. And initially they're moving along the southern edge of the harbor, and they're pushing west to east. And then once they round, it takes a couple of tidal cycles for them to round the head of the harbor. And when they go back out the channel, they're moving east to west. So there's a push-pull of sediment along that north side of the harbor, and it causes the elongation of those individual points. There's peat that starts to develop over time due to decaying vegetation and all that stuff in the center of the points, and the shoals that extend into the harbor get longer and longer. Really interesting, world-renowned geological formation.
Yeah, and it's my understanding that there's only maybe 2 other places in the world where these geological formations exist, so really special. And I know there's been 2 different efforts in recent history to try to designate those specifically as national natural landmarks. One actually really recently. I don't know the status of that. I know it's a really long process to make that happen, but I would love to see that happen in my lifetime.
For some reason, I feel it did. Well, I'll have to check on that. It either did happen, or it's very close to happening that it gets, but it's like a 10-year process. But yeah, I think you're right. There's only 2 other places in the world that have the same conditions that develop those cuspate spits. So it's extremely rare.
Yeah, well, I'd love to know the status of that proposal.
I'll have to check on it. Good question. Jocelyn, we've got, sorry, go ahead.
Do you consider Coatue to be fairly stable at this point? I know that the east side is taking the beating, but is Coatue sort of okay for the time being?
So it's
further down by those cuspate spits?
I'm just,
depends on where you are.
Because it's a barrier beach, its definition of stable is very fluid. So like Neil, you did a really great job of talking about the fact that the refuge is going to stay there. This is what barrier beaches do. It might feel like they're eroding, but actually, sand is rolling over and moving to other areas of that barrier beach, and you can actually see some really great. I've found some stuff online of other aerial photos of barrier beaches if you track them, and they can sometimes move half a mile, over a number of years. They'll stay intact, they just migrate. And I really think that's where we are with Coatue. That's what it's doing. The problem happens where you've got houses or a road or some piece of infrastructure. You hit up against that, and we have a harder time adapting to that and letting it change. We do have, there is one area on Coatue itself, and then there's the galls that Diane mentioned farther up the East Beach. Those were our other 2 areas that we really focused as being at risk for erosion or some dramatic change. And we're seeing a lot of change out there in Second Bend on Coatue is the area that we've really focused on, because Coatue Point is growing, like sand's accumulating on Coatue Point. But Second Bend, we're seeing a lot of erosion of dune, but what we're also seeing is that there's salt marsh that wants to grow there. So it's not that it's completely going away, it's shifting and changing, and we have to figure out how we can, do we need to do anything to assist that? Do we just need to pull back so we're maybe not driving right on top of where the salt marsh is going? Like, we need to think about our management as how we make things more resilient. You know, other ideas about Coatue?
There's some spots on Coatue proper that are pretty thin. Like, you know, you're talking less than 100 feet in between the harbor and the sound. And you're going to have sand moving through that system all the time. And those nearshore currents are changing how the beach looks on a seasonal basis. So there's some spots that, you know, the right storm coming in the right direction at the right intensity could cause a cut through. And it, like I said, it's happened before. So anything's possible, but we're looking at those places where we're seeing that change happening more rapidly as a place where maybe we can institute a nature-based solution for giving it a little bit more time or adding to that buffering as needed. And that's where we come into the focus. Nature is going to want to do what it wants to do. And a chaotic, dynamic beach ecosystem like this wants to be a living entity. It wants to move the way that it wants to move. And we can't fight the ocean.
Well, here's a question, kind of hard to ask. Are there any aspects to access that are actually harmful for the environment? So for instance, somebody mentioned peat. Okay, so I think in Maine, when I've been out and about, there are invasive species that dig into the peat and start spreading. So if you've got these vulnerable, thin, sandy areas, isn't it possible with people coming and going, they might spread something we don't want to spread?
Yeah, that's a really good and important question that we as beach managers are always asking ourselves. For example, driving on the beach is not super great for the beach. However, there are guidelines which the state developed about 30 years ago at this point that help beach managers like this provide access responsibly. So we do our due diligence to really adhere to those guidelines to make sure people are doing it in a way where it has a minimal impact to the beach system, so they're not driving in the dunes, impacting the vegetation, or driving, say, in the rack line, because that provides a really important resource for, say, foraging shorebirds. So we do our very best to try to make sure the access we provide does not impact the nature negatively. Because especially for the trustees, like, our mission is to get people out on these properties. You know, we have public use and enjoyment in our mission. So, and for me, that's sort of what I try to do through my work as well, is trying to get people out and experiencing the nature, because if you don't really understand or care about the resource, you don't necessarily feel motivated to protect it. So there's always that balance of getting people into nature and experiencing it and teaching them about it, but also trying to preserve it. So we try to find that balance, and I think you, with NCF, try to do the same thing as well, because we know these properties are near and dear to a lot of people's hearts, and yeah, we just want people to care about it.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I just have a comment. You know, I think many people in this room, especially all you, find going out to Great Point one of the great joys of life, as people have said, and we certainly do too. And when we bring our guests out there, they just are blown away. And so I just want to say we appreciate your work. We appreciate you focusing on accessibility and preservation. And I know it's probably not easy to have two groups having to work so closely together. especially with grant rating and everything. But it's great to see all of you super capable, knowledgeable people working to keep this resource available that provides so much joy to so many people. So I just want to say thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, on that note, we will close up. We're at 6 o'clock right now, so thank you so much, Shay, Neil, Diane, and Jennifer, for sharing your expertise and time with us this evening. And thank you all for joining us at the Whaling Museum.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, NHA.